The scream that tore from Violet Harper's throat echoed through the cramped kitchen of the farmhouse outside Ouray, Colorado, as her stepmother's boot came down hard on her already broken fingers. It was December of 1881, and the winter had arrived early and merciless in the San Juan Mountains, but nothing compared to the ice in Martha's eyes as she stood over the shattered pieces of her prized china dish scattered across the wooden floor. "You clumsy fool," Martha hissed, her voice low and venomous. "That dish belonged to my mother. Do you know what you have done?" Violet tried to pull her hand away, cradling it against her chest as tears streamed down her face. The pain was blinding, radiating up her arm in waves that made her stomach turn. She had not meant to drop the dish. Her hands had been numb from washing clothes in the icy water outside, and it had simply slipped from her frozen fingers. But explanations meant nothing to Martha, who had married Violet's father 3 years ago and made every day since a living nightmare. "I am sorry," Violet gasped through her tears. "Please, I did not mean to." But Martha was already turning away, her face twisted with disgust. "Get out of my sight. And if you think you are getting dinner tonight, you are mistaken. Maybe hunger will teach you to be more careful." Violet stumbled to her feet, clutching her injured hand to her chest. She could feel the unnatural angle of her fingers, the grinding sensation of broken bones. The pain made her dizzy, but she knew better than to ask for help. Martha would never allow a doctor to be called, and her father, weak and worn down by his second wife's constant manipulation, would side with Martha as he always did. She grabbed her threadbare coat from the hook by the door and slipped outside into the gathering darkness. Snow was beginning to fall again, thick and heavy, blanketing the world in white. The barn would offer some shelter, but it would be freezing. Still, it was better than staying in that house with Martha's cruel eyes watching her every move. Violet made it halfway across the yard before the pain overwhelmed her. She sank to her knees in the snow, sobbing, her broken hand throbbing with each beat of her heart. The cold bit through her thin coat, but she could not seem to make herself move. Everything hurt, and not just her hand. Her heart ached with a loneliness so profound it threatened to swallow her whole. She had been 19 years old for only 2 weeks, and she wondered if this was all her life would ever be. Her mother had died when she was 14, and those 5 years since had been filled with increasing misery as Martha tightened her grip on the household. Violet had no other family, no money of her own, nowhere to go. She was trapped. The sound of hoofbeats cut through her despair. Violet looked up through her tears to see a figure on horseback emerging from the swirling snow. The rider was tall and broad-shouldered, sitting easy in the saddle despite the weather. As he drew closer, she could make out more details in the fading light. He wore a long duster coat and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the snow, and there was something solid and reassuring about the way he carried himself. The rider pulled his horse to a stop a few feet away and swung down from the saddle in one smooth motion. He was young, perhaps 23 or 24, with dark hair that curled slightly beneath his hat and eyes that were startlingly blue even in the dim light. His face was weathered from time spent outdoors, but there was a gentleness in his expression as he took in her huddled form in the snow. "Miss," his voice was deep and warm, tinged with concern. "Are you hurt?" Violet tried to answer, but a fresh wave of pain stole her words. She held up her injured hand, and even in the gathering darkness, the unnatural angle of her fingers was visible. The man's expression darkened. He knelt beside her in the snow, his movements careful and deliberate. "May I look at it?" he asked, and there was such kindness in his voice that Violet found herself nodding. He took her hand in his with a gentleness that made her want to cry all over again. His own hands were large and calloused, the hands of a working man, but his touch was incredibly careful as he examined her injury. She saw his jaw tighten as he took in the extent of the damage. "These bones are badly broken," he said quietly. "This needs to be set and splinted." "How did this happen?" Violet looked away, shame burning in her chest. "I dropped a dish," she whispered. The man was silent for a long moment, and when she dared to look at him again, she saw understanding in his eyes. Not pity, but a clear comprehension that spoke of experience with the darker sides of human nature. "My name is Marcus Brennan," he said. "I have been working at the Silver Creek Ranch just north of here. I know how to set broken bones. I have done it for injured animals and a few ranch hands over the years. Will you let me help you?" Violet nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Marcus stood and helped her to her feet with his free hand, steadying her when she swayed. "Is there somewhere we can get out of this snow?" he asked. She gestured weakly toward the barn. The house was out of the question. She could not bear the thought of facing Martha again, not with this stranger who was showing her more kindness than she had known in years. Marcus seemed to understand without explanation. He grabbed his horse's reins and led both the animal and Violet toward the barn. Inside, it was marginally warmer, the thick walls cutting the wind if not the cold. The horses her father kept for the farm shifted in their stalls, curious about the intrusion. Marcus tied his horse to a post and then turned his attention back to Violet. "Sit down here," he said, gesturing to a hay bale. "I need to get some supplies from my saddlebag." Violet sank onto the hay, watching as he rummaged through his belongings. He pulled out a length of clean cloth, some wooden splints that looked like they had been carved for just such a purpose, and a small flask. "This is going to hurt," he said honestly as he knelt before her again. "I will not lie to you about that. But once the bones are set and splinted, it will feel better than it does now." "I understand," Violet said, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus handed her the flask. "Take a drink. It will help with the pain." She took a swallow, gasping as the whiskey burned down her throat. She had never had alcohol before, and the heat of it was shocking. But Marcus was right. After a moment, a warm numbness began to spread through her. "What is your name?" Marcus asked as he began to gently clean the dirt and snow from her hand. "Violet Harper," she managed. "That is a beautiful name," he said, and there was such sincerity in his voice that she felt warmth bloom in her chest despite everything. "Violet, I need you to be brave for me. I am going to set these bones now. It will be quick, but it will hurt. Can you do that?" She nodded, bracing herself. Marcus positioned her hand carefully, and then with swift, sure movements, he began to manipulate the broken bones back into place. Violet bit down on her lip hard enough to draw blood, muffling her cries. The pain was excruciating, white-hot and all-consuming, but Marcus worked with such confidence and care that she found herself trusting him completely. "Almost done," he murmured. "You are doing wonderfully." When the bones were set, he carefully splinted her fingers, wrapping them securely but not so tightly as to cut off circulation. His hands were steady and sure, and Violet found herself watching his face as he worked. There was a concentration in his expression, a determination to do right by her that made something flutter in her chest. "There," he said finally, sitting back on his heels. "That should hold until you can see a proper doctor." "Thank you," Violet whispered. The pain had settled into a dull throb, manageable now that her bones were no longer grinding against each other. "I do not know how to repay you." Marcus shook his head. "No repayment necessary. I could not ride by and leave you suffering in the snow." He paused, his blue eyes studying her face. "Violet, I do not mean to pry, but are you safe here? That injury did not look like it came from just dropping a dish. Fresh tears spilled down Violet's cheeks before she could stop them. There was something about this man's kindness that broke down all her carefully constructed walls. "My stepmother," she said haltingly. "She was angry. She stepped on my hand after I dropped her mother's dish." She saw rage flash across Marcus's face, quick and fierce, but he controlled it almost immediately. When he spoke, his voice was calm, though she could hear the steel beneath it. "That is not right. No one should treat you that way." "I have nowhere else to go," Violet said, the despair she had been holding back flooding through her. "My father will not stand up to her. I have no money, no family. I am trapped here." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and she could see him thinking, weighing something in his mind. Finally, he spoke. "I have an idea, but I need you to hear me out before you say no." Violet looked at him, curiosity cutting through her misery. "The Silver Creek Ranch where I work, they are always looking for help with cooking and household management. The owner, Mrs. Reynolds, is a widow who runs the place with her 2 sons. She is a good woman, fair and kind. The pay is not much, but it comes with room and board in the main house. You would be safe there, and you would be earning your own money. If you wanted, I could take you there tonight, right now." Violet stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "You would do that for me, but you do not even know me." "I know enough," Marcus said firmly. "I know that you deserve better than what you have here. And I know that if I ride away and leave you in this situation, I will never forgive myself." Hope, fragile and terrifying, began to bloom in Violet's chest. "What about my father?" she asked. "You are 19 years old," Marcus said. "You are of age to make your own decisions. If you want to leave him a note, you can. But you owe nothing to people who hurt you, Violet, not even if they are family." The truth of his words resonated deep in her soul. She thought of her father, who had stood by and let Martha treat her terribly for 3 years. She thought of all the nights she had gone to bed hungry, all the cruel words and harsh punishments. And she thought of the woman her mother had been, strong and loving, who would never have wanted this life for her daughter. "Yes," Violet said, the word coming out stronger than she had expected. "Yes, I want to go with you." Marcus's face broke into a smile that transformed his features, making him look younger and lighting up his eyes. "Good. Do you have anything you need to gather? Clothes or personal belongings?" "I have a bag in the barn loft," Violet said. "Just a few dresses and my mother's Bible, that is all." "I will get it for you," Marcus said, rising to his feet. "You rest that hand." He climbed up to the loft and returned a moment later with her small carpet-bag. It contained everything she owned in the world, which was painfully little. But as she looked at Marcus's kind face in the dim light of the barn, she thought that maybe she was richer than she had ever been. Marcus helped her onto his horse, settling her in front of him in the saddle. The position was intimate, her back pressed against his chest, his arms coming around her to hold the reins. Under any other circumstances, Violet would have been mortified by the impropriety. But there was nothing improper about the way Marcus held her, steady and protective, making sure she was secure before he urged the horse forward into the snowy night. The ride to Silver Creek Ranch took nearly an hour through the heavy snow. Marcus kept the horse at a careful pace, mindful of the treacherous footing and Violet's injured hand. He talked as they rode, his voice a low rumble against her back, telling her about the ranch and Mrs. Reynolds and what she could expect. "Mrs. Reynolds lost her husband 5 years ago," he explained. "He was a good man, built the ranch up from nothing. She has 2 sons, Thomas and James. Thomas is the older one. He is 28 and handles most of the cattle operations. James is 25 and manages the horses. They are both good men, honorable. You will be safe there." "How long have you worked at the ranch?" Violet asked, her curiosity growing despite her exhaustion and pain. "About 2 years now," Marcus said. I came out west from Missouri after my parents died. I needed a fresh start, and ranching suited me. Mrs. Reynolds took a chance on me when I did not have much experience, and I have been grateful ever since." There was something in his voice that spoke of his own past hurts, his own need for kindness when the world had been cruel. Violet found herself relaxing against him, feeling safer than she had in years. When they finally reached the ranch, Violet was amazed by what she saw. Even through the snow, she could make out a large main house with warm light glowing in the windows, a substantial barn, several outbuildings, and extensive corrals. This was no small operation, but a thriving ranch that spoke of hard work and success. Marcus dismounted and then helped Violet down, keeping a hand on her elbow to steady her. "Come on," he said. "Let us get you inside and warm." He led her up the steps to the main house and knocked firmly on the door. It swung open a moment later to reveal a woman in her late 40s with steel-gray hair pulled back in a neat bun and shrewd but kind eyes. She took in Marcus's serious expression and Violet's bedraggled appearance in one swift glance. "Marcus," she said, "what has happened?" "Mrs. Reynolds, this is Violet Harper. She needs help, and I am hoping you might have a place for her here." Mrs. Reynolds's eyes moved to Violet's splinted hand, and her expression softened. "Come in, child. You look half frozen. Marcus, take care of your horse and then come to the kitchen. I will want to hear this story." The warmth of the house enveloped Violet like a blanket as Mrs. Reynolds ushered her inside. The interior was clean and comfortable, with sturdy furniture and colorful rugs on the wooden floors. The smell of something delicious cooking made Violet's empty stomach clench with hunger. Mrs. Reynolds led her to the kitchen and sat her down at a large table. "Let me look at that hand," she said, and Violet obediently held it out. The older woman examined Marcus's work with an approving nod. "He did a fine job with this splint. That boy has steady hands. Now, when did you last eat?" "This morning," Violet admitted. "Just some bread." Mrs. Reynolds's lips thinned, but she said nothing as she bustled about the kitchen, ladling soup into a bowl and cutting thick slices of bread. She set the food in front of Violet and then poured her a cup of hot coffee. "Eat," she commanded gently. "We will talk after." Violet did not need to be told twice. She ate carefully, mindful of her injured hand, but with an appetite born of hunger and relief. The soup was rich and flavorful, full of vegetables and tender beef, and the bread was fresh and warm. It was the best meal she had eaten in years. By the time Marcus returned from settling his horse, Violet had finished eating and some color had returned to her cheeks. He took a seat at the table, and Mrs. Reynolds poured him coffee as well before settling into her own chair. "Now then," she said, "tell me what this is all about." Marcus looked at Violet, giving her the choice of whether to speak. She took a deep breath and told her story, leaving nothing out. She spoke of her mother's death, her father's remarriage, Martha's cruelty, and finally the events of tonight. Mrs. Reynolds listened without interruption, her face growing increasingly grave. When Violet finished, Mrs. Reynolds reached across the table and took her good hand in both of hers. "You are safe here now," she said firmly. "No one will hurt you under my roof. As for employment, Marcus was right. I could use help managing the household. My arthritis has been bothering me more this winter, and it would be a relief to have someone to share the work. You will have your own room, 3 meals a day, and a fair wage. In return, I will expect honest work and respect. Does that sound agreeable to you?" "More than agreeable," Violet said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Mrs. Reynolds. You cannot know what this means to me." "I think I can," the older woman said with a knowing look. "I was not always the owner of a successful ranch, child. I know what it is to feel trapped and helpless. Now, let us get you settled." "Marcus, would you mind helping Violet to the room at the end of the upstairs hall?" "The one with the blue quilt." Marcus stood immediately. "Of course, madam." He picked up Violet's carpetbag and led her up a steep staircase to the second floor. The room Mrs. Reynolds had assigned her was small but beautiful, with a comfortable bed covered in the promised blue quilt, a wardrobe, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and a window that would look out over the ranch in daylight. "This is lovely," Violet breathed, running her good hand over the quilt. She had never had a room of her own before, not even before her mother died. "You deserve lovely things," Marcus said quietly. He set her bag down by the wardrobe and then turned to face her. "How is your hand feeling?" "Much better, thanks to you," Violet said. She looked up at him, this man who had changed her life in the space of a few hours, and felt her heart swell with gratitude and something else, something warmer and more complicated. "Marcus, I do not know how to thank you for what you have done tonight. You saved me." He stepped closer, and in the soft lamplight of the room his blue eyes were intense. "You do not need to thank me, Violet. I just did what any decent person would do." "No," she said firmly. "Most people would have ridden past. Most people would not have cared, but you stopped. You helped me. You brought me here. That is not just decency, Marcus. That is kindness and courage." She saw color rise in his cheeks, and it made her smile despite everything. This strong, capable man was blushing at her words. "Get some rest," he said softly. "Tomorrow will be a better day, I promise you that. And if you need anything, anything at all, my room is in the bunkhouse with the other ranch hands. But Mrs. Reynolds is just down the hall, and you can trust her completely." "I will," Violet promised. "Good night, Marcus." "Good night, Violet." He left, closing the door quietly behind him, and Violet sank onto the bed, overwhelmed by the changes the evening had brought. This morning she had woken in her father's house, trapped and hopeless. Tonight she was free in a beautiful room with the promise of honest work and safety. And she had met Marcus Brennan, whose kindness had given her back her hope. She changed into her nightgown awkwardly, working around her splinted hand, and climbed into bed. The mattress was soft, the quilts warm, and for the first time in years, Violet fell asleep feeling safe. The next weeks passed in a blur of new experiences and growing comfort. Violet threw herself into her work at the ranch, determined to prove her worth. Despite her injured hand, she managed to help Mrs. Reynolds with cooking, cleaning, and managing the household accounts. The older woman was a patient teacher, showing Violet how to make the hearty meals that fed the ranch hands, how to preserve food for the winter, and how to keep track of the ranch's expenses. Violet met Thomas and James Reynolds within the first few days. Both men were polite and respectful, greeting her with friendly smiles and making her feel welcome. Thomas was tall and serious, with his mother's shrewd eyes and a commanding presence. James was lighter in spirit, quick to joke and laugh, with an easy charm that made everyone around him comfortable. But it was Marcus whom Violet found herself watching for, thinking about, longing to see. He came to the main house for meals with the other ranch hands, and Violet made sure to always serve him an extra-large portion. They would exchange smiles across the busy kitchen, and sometimes Marcus would linger after the others had left, helping her clear the table or wash dishes. Their conversations during these stolen moments were wide-ranging and deep. Marcus told her about growing up in Missouri, about losing his parents to fever, about his dreams of someday having his own small ranch. Violet shared her memories of her mother, her love of reading, her hope that maybe someday she could have a life filled with joy instead of fear. "You will have that life," Marcus told her one evening as they stood side by side at the sink, their hands brushing as they worked. "You already are having it. Look how far you have come in just a few weeks. It was true. Violet could feel herself changing, growing stronger and more confident. The constant fear that had been her companion for 3 years was slowly fading, replaced by a tentative hope and happiness. Her hand was healing well, too. After a month, Mrs. Reynolds insisted on taking her into our ray to see the doctor. Violet had been nervous about going into town, afraid she might run into her father or Martha, but Marcus volunteered to escort them, and with him by her side, she felt brave enough to face anything. The doctor praised Marcus's work in setting the bones and said that, with time and care, her hand would heal completely. There might be some stiffness, he warned, but she would regain full use of it. The news filled Violet with relief and joy. As they left the doctor's office, Marcus offered Violet his arm, and she took it without hesitation. They walked down the main street of our ray together, Mrs. Reynolds a few steps ahead giving them a measure of privacy, and Violet felt like she was in a dream. The winter sun was bright on the snow, the mountains rose majestically around them, and the man beside her made her heart race in a way that was both terrifying and wonderful. "Violet," Marcus said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I need to tell you something." She looked up at him, her heart in her throat. "What is it?" He stopped walking and turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his, careful of her still healing injury. "These past weeks, getting to know you, seeing you thrive at the ranch, it has been the best time of my life. You are the strongest, most courageous person I have ever met, and you are beautiful, inside and out. I know it has not been long, and I know you have been through so much, but I cannot keep this to myself any longer. I am falling in love with you, Violet Harper. Actually, I think I started falling the moment I saw you in the snow." Tears sprang to Violet's eyes, but they were tears of joy. "Marcus," she whispered, "I feel the same way. I have been trying to tell myself it was too soon, that I should not let myself feel this way, but I cannot help it. You saved my life, and then you gave me a reason to want to live it fully. I love you." The smile that broke across Marcus's face was like sunrise. He pulled her into his arms, mindful of her hand, and held her close. Violet rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and felt complete in a way she never had before. "Ahem," came Mrs. Reynolds's voice from a few feet away, amusement evident in her tone. "As happy as I am to see this development, you two are causing a scene in the middle of town." They sprang apart, both blushing furiously, and Mrs. Reynolds laughed. "Come along, lovebirds. We have shopping to do, and then we need to get back to the ranch before dark." The ride back to Silver Creek Ranch was filled with stolen glances and shy smiles. Mrs. Reynolds pretended not to notice, but Violet caught the satisfied look on the older woman's face more than once. That evening, Marcus asked Mrs. Reynolds's permission to court Violet properly. The older woman gave her blessing readily, clearly delighted by the match. Thomas and James teased Marcus mercilessly, but in a good-natured way that spoke of their approval and affection. The courtship that followed was the happiest time of Violet's life. Marcus was attentive and romantic, carving her small gifts from wood during the long winter evenings, bringing her wildflowers when spring began to arrive, stealing kisses in the barn when they thought no one was looking. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, learning each other's hopes and dreams and fears. Violet bloomed under his love and attention. The frightened, hurt girl who had arrived at Silver Creek Ranch in the snow was transforming into a confident, joyful woman. Her hand healed completely, just as the doctor had promised, and she threw herself into her work with renewed energy. She also began to develop real friendships. Mrs. Reynolds became like a mother to her, teaching her not just household skills but also about managing money, standing up for herself, and recognizing her own worth. Thomas and James treated her like a beloved younger sister, protective and kind. And the other ranch hands respected her, appreciating the delicious meals she helped prepare and her cheerful presence around the ranch. Spring gave way to summer, and the mountains around our Ray exploded with color and life. Marcus took Violet riding on his days off, showing her the beautiful country around the ranch. They would pack a lunch and spend the day exploring, talking, and falling deeper in love. One evening in late July, as they sat beside a mountain stream watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, Marcus took Violet's hand in his. "Violet," he said, his voice serious, "I have been saving my wages since I came to work at Silver Creek. I have enough now to buy a small piece of land and start building a house. It would not be much at first, just a cabin really, but over time I could build it into something bigger, something worthy of you." Violet's heart began to race. "Marcus, what are you saying?" He shifted so that he was kneeling before her, still holding her hand, his blue eyes blazing with love and intensity. "I am saying that I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to build a home with you, raise a family with you, grow old with you. Violet Harper, will you marry me?" "Yes," Violet said, the word bursting out of her before he had even finished speaking. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Marcus laughed, a sound of pure joy, and pulled her into his arms. He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and Violet kissed him back with all the love in her heart. When they returned to the ranch that evening, hand in hand and glowing with happiness, Mrs. Reynolds took one look at them and clapped her hands together in delight. "Finally! I was wondering when you were going to make it official, Marcus Brennan." The next months were a whirlwind of preparation. Mrs. Reynolds insisted on hosting the wedding at the ranch and threw herself into planning with enthusiasm. She helped Violet make a wedding dress from beautiful white fabric they bought in our Ray, teaching her the delicate stitching and beadwork that made it truly special. Marcus, with the help of Thomas and James and the other ranch hands, began building their cabin on the piece of land he had purchased just north of the Silver Creek Ranch. It was close enough that they could still help at the ranch when needed, but far enough to give them privacy and independence. Violet would ride out with lunch for the workers and watch as the walls went up. The roof took shape, and her future home became a reality. The wedding took place on a beautiful September afternoon in 1882, nearly a year after that snowy night when Marcus had found Violet crying in the snow. The ceremony was held outdoors on the ranch, with the mountains as a backdrop and all the ranch hands and neighbors for miles around in attendance. Violet wore her handmade dress and carried a bouquet of wildflowers. Mrs. Reynolds stood beside her like a proud mother, and James walked her down the aisle in the absence of her father. Violet had sent a letter to her father months ago, telling him she was safe and happy, but she had heard nothing in return. It hurt, but she had made peace with it. The people who truly mattered were here with her today. Marcus stood at the makeshift altar in his best suit, which Mrs. Reynolds had insisted on buying for him, and when he saw Violet walking toward him, his face transformed with wonder and love. Thomas stood beside him as his best man, grinning broadly. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to love, honor, and cherish each other through whatever life might bring. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and told Marcus he could kiss his bride, Marcus did so with such tenderness and joy that half the women in attendance started crying. The celebration that followed was raucous and joyful, with music and dancing and more food than Violet had ever seen. Mrs. Reynolds had outdone herself, and Violet made sure to tell her so, hugging the older woman tightly and thanking her for everything she had done. "You are the daughter of my heart," Mrs. Reynolds said, her eyes bright with tears. "And Marcus is like another son to me. Seeing you two happy together is all the thanks I need." As the sun set and the party continued, Marcus swept Violet into his arms and carried her toward their new home, amid cheers and laughter from their friends. The cabin was small but cozy, with a large fireplace, a comfortable bed, a sturdy table and chairs, and windows that looked out over the mountains. Marcus had built it with his own hands, pouring all his love and care into every nail and board. He set Violet down gently inside the door and then cupped her face in his hands. "Welcome home, Mrs. Brennan." Violet felt tears of happiness slide down her cheeks. "I love you so much, Marcus." "I love you too," he said, "more than I ever thought possible. Thank you for taking a chance on me, for trusting me, for building this life with me." "Thank you for finding me in the snow," Violet whispered. "Thank you for seeing me when I felt invisible, for caring when no one else did, for loving me when I did not think I was worthy of love." "You were always worthy," Marcus said fiercely. "Always. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never forget that." They kissed, and then Marcus carried her to their marriage bed, where they consummated their union with tenderness and passion, discovering the joy of being one flesh as God intended. The years that followed were full and happy. Marcus proved to be an excellent rancher, and with hard work and dedication, he built their small operation into something truly impressive. He raised cattle and horses, and his reputation for honesty and quality spread throughout the region. Violet managed their home with skill and grace, and she also began taking in sewing and alterations, using the skills Mrs. Reynolds had taught her to earn extra money. They remained close to the Reynolds family, eating Sunday dinners at the main house and helping out during busy seasons. Mrs. Reynolds doted on them both, and Thomas and James continued to treat them like family. In the spring of 1884, Violet discovered she was pregnant. The news filled both her and Marcus with joy and not a little trepidation. Violet was nervous about childbirth, but Mrs. Reynolds assured her that she would be there to help, and Marcus held her hand and told her that she was the strongest person he knew. Their first child, a son they named Matthew, was born in December of 1884 during a snowstorm that reminded them both of the night they had met. The birth was long and difficult, but Mrs. Reynolds coached Violet through it with patient expertise, and Marcus never left her side. When they finally placed the squalling baby in Violet's arms, she looked down at his tiny red face and felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. "He is perfect," Marcus breathed, touching his son's tiny hand with one finger. "Just like his mother." Matthew was followed by a daughter, Elizabeth, in 1886, another son, William, in 1888, and finally another daughter, Rose, in 1890. Their cabin, which Marcus had expanded twice to accommodate their growing family, was always filled with laughter and love. Violet proved to be a wonderful mother, patient and nurturing but also firm when needed. She taught her children to read using her mother's Bible, told them stories, and made sure they knew they were loved unconditionally. Marcus was equally devoted, teaching his sons to ride and rope and manage cattle, and spoiling his daughters with carved toys and endless patience. The children grew up surrounded by love and security, never knowing the fear and hurt that had marked their mother's early life. Violet made sure of that. She was determined that her children would know only kindness and acceptance, and she and Marcus built a home where that was possible. In 1895, when Violet was 33 and Marcus was 37, they received an unexpected visitor. Violet was hanging laundry on the line, watching her youngest children play in the yard, when a wagon pulled up to their house. An old man climbed down stiffly, and it took Violet a moment to recognize him. It was her father. He had aged terribly in the 14 years since she had seen him, his hair gone white, his face lined and haggard. He stood uncertainly by the wagon, his hat in his hands, looking like he was not sure he had the right to be there. Violet felt a complicated mix of emotions rise in her chest. Anger, hurt, sadness, but also pity. This broken old man bore little resemblance to the father she had loved as a child. "Violet," he said, his voice tentative. "Is that you?" "It is me, father," she said, drying her hands on her apron. Marcus appeared from the barn, alerted by the sound of the wagon. He moved to stand beside Violet, a solid presence of support, and she took his hand gratefully. "I heard you had married, had children," her father said. "I wanted to see you to tell you something before it is too late. I am dying, Violet. The doctor says I have maybe 6 months." Violet felt a pang of grief, but it was distant, the grief for the father he could have been rather than the one he was. "I am sorry to hear that." "I am sorry too," he said, and tears began to roll down his weathered cheeks. "I am sorry for so many things. Sorry I was weak. Sorry I let Martha treat you the way she did. Sorry I did not stand up for you when I should have. You deserved so much better, and I failed you. I failed your mother's memory." The apology she had never expected to hear, never even allowed herself to hope for, hung in the air between them. Violet felt Marcus squeeze her hand, lending her strength. "Where is Martha?" Violet asked. "Dead," her father said. "Died 2 years ago of pneumonia. After she passed, I had time to think about what I had become, what I had allowed. It has eaten at me every day since. I do not expect you to forgive me, Violet. I do not deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I am sorry and that I am proud of what you have made of your life. This place, your family, you did this despite me, not because of me." Violet looked at her father, this sad old man who had hurt her so deeply, and felt the anger that had lived in her heart for so long begin to soften. He had been weak, yes, and he had failed her. But holding on to that bitterness would only hurt her and her family. Marcus had taught her what real love looked like, what real family could be. And she had learned that forgiveness was not about letting someone off the hook, but about freeing herself from the weight of the past. "I forgive you, Father," she said quietly. "I will not pretend that what happened did not hurt me, because it did. But I have a good life now, a life filled with love and joy, and I do not want to carry anger anymore. So yes, I forgive you." Her father broke down completely, sobbing into his hands. Violet looked up at Marcus, who nodded his understanding and support. She stepped forward and put a hand on her father's shoulder. "Would you like to meet your grandchildren?" she asked. Her father looked up at her with such hope and gratitude that it nearly broke her heart. "I would like that more than anything." Violet called her children over and introduced them to their grandfather. The children, curious and kind as children often are, bombarded him with questions and showed him their toys and the animals in the barn. Violet watched her father interact with them, saw the wonder and joy on his face, and felt a sense of peace settle over her. Her father stayed for dinner, which Violet prepared with the skill and love she brought to everything she did. Over the meal, he told stories about Violet's mother, stories that made her laugh and cry and remember a time when she had been happy. Marcus watched over everything, ready to step in if needed, but content to let Violet navigate this reunion on her own terms. When her father left as the sun was setting, promising to return for another visit if Violet would allow it, she watched the wagon disappear down the road and then turned into Marcus's arms. "Are you all right?" he asked, holding her close. "I am," Violet said, and she meant it. "I did not know I needed that closure, but I did. Thank you for letting me handle it my way." "You are the strongest person I know," Marcus said, echoing the words he had spoken to her so many times over the years. "I knew you would handle it exactly right." Her father did return several times over the next few months, building a tentative relationship with Violet and her family. When he died that winter, Violet mourned not for the father he had been, but for the father he could have been. But she had made her peace with it, and she did not let it darken the joy of her life. The years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and milestones. Matthew grew into a strong, capable young man who loved ranching as much as his father. Elizabeth inherited her mother's way with sewing and began making beautiful quilts and dresses that she sold in town. William was the dreamer of the family, always with his nose in a book, talking about going to college someday. And Rose, the baby, was a perfect combination of both her parents, strong and kind and full of life. Marcus and Violet grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. The passion of their youth mellowed into something even more beautiful, a partnership built on respect, trust, and unwavering devotion. They still held hands whenever they walked together, still stole kisses in the barn, still looked at each other like they could not believe their luck in finding one another. In 1902, when Violet was 40 and Marcus was 44, they celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary with a party that brought together everyone they loved. Mrs. Reynolds, now elderly but still sharp as a tack, gave a toast that had everyone laughing and crying. Thomas and James, both married now with children of their own, roasted Marcus good-naturedly. And the children, ranging in age from 18-year-old Matthew to 12-year-old Rose, performed a song they had written about their parents' love story. As the party wound down and guests began to head home, Marcus took Violet's hand and led her outside. The September night was clear and cool, the stars brilliant overhead. They walked to the spot where their cabin had first stood, now incorporated into the much larger house that had grown around it. "Do you remember that night I found you in the snow?" Marcus asked, pulling Violet into his arms. "I remember everything about that night," Violet said, resting her head on his chest. "It was the worst night of my life and the best night of my life all at once. I knew from the moment I saw you that you were going to change everything," Marcus said. "I did not know how, but I knew. And you did. You made me a better man, Violet. You gave me a family, a home, a purpose. Everything good in my life comes from you." "And everything good in my life comes from you," Violet countered. "You saved me, Marcus, not just that night in the snow, but every day since. You showed me what love was supposed to look like, what family could be. You gave me a life beyond anything I ever dared to dream." They stood there under the stars, holding each other, two people who had found each other in the darkness and built a life full of light. The journey from that snowy December night to this September evening had been long and sometimes difficult, but they had walked it together, hand in hand, and that had made all the difference. Their children grew and eventually married and had children of their own, filling Marcus and Violet's later years with the joy of grandchildren. Matthew took over the ranch, running it with the same dedication his father had shown. Elizabeth married a teacher and moved to Denver but visited often. William went to college, just as he had dreamed, and became a lawyer in our way. And Rose married a neighboring rancher's son and settled close by, giving Violet the gift of seeing her youngest daughter nearly every day. Marcus and Violet grew old together, their hair turning gray, their bodies slowing, but their love never diminishing. They would sit on their porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sun set over the mountains, counting their blessings and marveling at the life they had built from the ashes of pain and despair. When Marcus died peacefully in his sleep in 1918 at the age of 60, Violet mourned him deeply, but not desperately. She had been loved completely for 36 years, had built a family that would carry on his legacy, and had memories enough to last a lifetime. She took comfort in her children and grandchildren, and in the knowledge that she and Marcus had lived a love story for the ages. Violet lived another 8 years, passing away in 1926 at the age of 64, surrounded by her children and many of her grandchildren. Her last words were of Marcus, and those present swore that, as she took her final breath, her face lit up with joy, as if she could see him waiting for her. They buried her beside him on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, under a sky as blue and endless as his eyes had been. And if you visit that spot today, you can still see their names carved into the headstones, side by side for eternity. Marcus Brennan, beloved husband and father, and Violet Brennan, beloved wife and mother. Below their names, carved by their son Matthew with his own hands, is a simple phrase that tells their whole story. Love found in the snow, lasting forever.